How do you differentiate an answer from a response? An answer gives definitive, conclusive solutions. In physics and in mathematics, we search for clear-cut answers. When it comes to social sciences, philosophy, we don't really have answers, but we have responses. We are not definitively, completely giving an answer that is good for all times, but we are approaching the question more, reflecting on it, and let us say, melting ourselves into it. That's a question of giving a response. In philosophy, we can only aim at giving responses which are more adequate. And that is not a weakness of philosophy, that is its strength. Because the subject, I, am involved in the answering or responding, I cannot have clarity, I cannot have absolute transparency in responding to the subjective questions raised in philosophy. Therefore, philosophy gives us responses which are adequate or even more adequate. Doesn't give us clear and definitive answers or solutions. That is precisely the strength of philosophy. Moving to the second question, every understanding is self-understanding. If you reflect on this famous quotation from Paul Ricoeur, every time I understand the world outside, I am indirectly understanding myself. When I reflect on physics, on geography, when I reflect on God, when I reflect on the other human beings, I am conversely reflecting on myself and encountering myself more and more. Therefore, not in an egoistic or selfish way, but in a general or epistemological way, every time I try to understand something, I am understanding myself more and more. The basic question, who am I, may be answered in different ways. One way of answering that question, who am I, is to look at others, the world and God, and then see my reflection in them. Therefore, as Paul Ricoeur rightly says, every understanding is self-understanding. The most practical thing is a good theory. This is another quotation from the famous English gentleman G.K. Chesterton. We normally think that that which is practical, that which changes the world and ourselves, is through hard work, through laborious work. But what we need to understand, the pre-understanding before hard work, is that hard work and labor that changes the world stems from a good theory. If we have a liberative understanding of the human person, as Cyril de Brulé would say, then consequently our work, our commitment would be liberative, and that would change the world. For example, a very good theory is the theory and the experience of the resurrection. And this theory experience has radically and dramatically changed the world. So too, we know that the pen is mightier than the world. An idea can change the world. Therefore, Chesterton is right. The most practical thing is a good theory. And when we philosophize, reflect on issues philosophically, we are trying to discern and formulate that good theory which would lead to practical consequences. The third statement, theology is anthropology. The Ludwig Feuerbach said it, and he said it in a very negative manner. He said, and he meant, that whenever we do theology, whenever we theologize on God, we are nothing but projecting the noblest aspect of the human person. Therefore, every theology is nothing but speaking about human beings. But Karl Rahner, that famous German theologian, will understand the same statement. he would agree that every theologizing is nothing but anthropological reflection. But he would say the only language we can speak about God is the human language. We can try to understand and experience God only using human categories. Therefore, forerunner also, theology is anthropology. That does not mean that there is no God outside or inside. That does not mean that we are reducing God to our noblest aspirations. No. We can approach God, we can come closer to God only by using human terms, human categories, human dreams and wishes. In this sense, every theology is anthropology, positively as understood by Karl Rahner, negatively as understood by Feuerbach. These few minutes I want to spend reflecting on some questions, some issues connected to philosophical anthropology. Philosophical anthropology, as you know, is a little distinct and at the same time related to anthropology, which is the study of the human person. While philosophical anthropology focuses on the analytical, the rational aspect, the general anthropology that is taught in the schools and universities focuses on empirical method, on archaeology and on culture as it is lived out. Therefore, the issues that we raise here are that of philosophical anthropology, based on reason, reflection, not directly based on evidence, experience. What is the difference between general anthropology and philosophical anthropology? General anthropology is that which is taught mostly in the universities, that deals with archaeology, sociobiology. They normally talk about and study about the tribes and the origin of the human being and what would be the present conditions. Unlike the general anthropology that focuses on empirical evidence, going and meeting people, conducting interview, ours is philosophical anthropology. Unfortunately or fortunately, we rely more on reason, critical analysis and hermeneutical applications. We study human beings not going to the field but reflecting on the basic conditions that makes a human being a person. Her nature, her way of life, her essential features like freedom, love, death and life after death. Therefore, philosophical anthropology is more or less a theoretical phenomenon, unlike the general anthropology that focuses on practical and empirical dimensions of human beings living with one another. Let's come to a very general definition of culture. As we understand, a culture is that which is unique to human beings. Culture is that which separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom and plants. We know the famous distinction between nurture and culture. Nurture is everything that is given to us biologically. Culture is what we make out of that biology. If we follow this distinction, then we can say essentially our culture, that is the unique human features, consists of creative language, conceptual art and transcendental religion. So this kind of language, religion, art, they enable us to spring beyond that which is given to us by nature, by biology. And that is what makes us unique. Culture is that which enables us to go beyond the humanly given, biologically given instincts and nature. And we don't have to repeat all that human beings have been doing in the last 8,000 or 2 million years, because we have a culture. Religion, literature, books, writings, collective memory, history, all are part of the culture. And it is this culture that clearly draws a demarcation point between animals and human beings. What are the features that makes human beings unique from the rest of the existing things? As I said, maybe we can say 3 things. 1, creative language. Language is unique to all human and non-human beings language as means of communication. But we only have this creative language, including, so to say, abstract nouns, zero, and so on. Secondly, art, that is creative art, conceptual art. The birds know how to make their nest so aesthetically beautifully, but they have been doing it the same way throughout the years. Human beings, from the hut that has been beautiful to your home, to your flat, and now the mega structures that we make, we have been evolving in our aesthetic sense. So the creative art is something unique to human beings. Thirdly, the religion, the transcendental religion that enables human beings to form a community and then worship before a God who is beyond us. So these three things, conceptual language, creative art, and transcendental religion, these are the three things that makes us unique, fundamentally unique to human beings. Coming to what is creative art. Creative art is not just making beautiful, aesthetically meaningful things. It could be a nest, it could be a picture, it could be a landscape. But the creativity in human beings, that is both in me personally and in the human society together, enables us to further make progress on what is given. The painting may be good, but through the painting, inspired by the painting and using the painting as background, I can draw something even more larger, more ennobling. And that is the creative art. How is transcendental religion unique to human beings? Religion, most of them are transcendental. There would be only very few religions, maybe to some extent Buddhism or tribal religions, which may be called natural religions and not transcendental religions. There may be people who don't believe in God, but even those atheists would have an idea of what transcendental religion is. The transcendental religion is worshipping a divinity, the heilige or the sacred, worshipping the God who is above us, who is beyond us. Somehow this kind of a worship, falling before this, the holy, the sacred, makes us unique from the rest of the human and rest of the animal kingdom. We don't know of any other creatures who have developed or evolved this capacity to worship a God. So in this sense, transcendental religion is unique to us. Even when some people don't believe in God, at least all of us have got the capacity to fall before that divine God, the holy other, the Gansandare, and worship him. So in this sense, worshipping someone totally different from us is something unique to us. Is language unique to human beings? We must make a distinction. Language as a means of communication is not unique to us. Birds do it. Animals share their knowledge through various kinds of communication. So, language as a means of communication is the same for human beings and for animals. But language as a conceptual entity, as a creative entity, is very, very unique to us. We use the language not only to communicate what we think, we use language to think. We use language to create concepts, to manipulate those concepts and come up with new ideas and new vision. Language for us is a way of being. The linguistic turn or the linguistic nature of our being is unique to human beings. We can philosophize, we can theorize, Because we have a language. So this kind of a language that is part and parcel of our very being is unique to human beings. The linguistic aspect of our life, the linguistic nature of our being, that is unique to us. This is the conceptual part, the creative part, the enabling part of human beings. Without language, we would have been just like any other animal, maybe a little more sophisticated, little more puny, little more clever. But we wouldn't be able to come up with this huge complex structure that we have developed without language. In this sense, language not as a means of communication, but language as part of our being is unique to us. Now, how do you understand the relationship between body and soul in Plato? Plato, like Shankara, was clearly a dualist. He would say, the body is the inferior part of me, while the soul is the essential, the superior part of me. For Plato, body is like a shirt. I can wear it and I can change it whenever I want. Since he believed in the transmigration of the soul is the real self, and the body is like the shirt that we go on changing. Drawing on the imagery of the cave, we can very well say Plato had a dualistic vision, body versus soul. For him, body, the soma, was a prison, the sema. Therefore, the body, along with it, the natural tendencies like sex, like emotions, were inferior or negative. Therefore, Plato had a negative understanding of the body and a superior understanding of the soul. Coming to Aristotle, he tried to bring in a little bit of balance in Plato's understanding. For Aristotle, the body informs the soul. Therefore, body and soul are not two opposed entities. Body and soul enrich each other. The body informs the soul. The soul may be nobler and better, but without the body, the soul would not be. So therefore, unlike the dualistic understanding of Plato, Aristotle had more or less an integrated understanding of the body-soul. So we are the body-soul who form one unified whole. Coming to Karl Marx, Marx primarily saw the human person as a worker, manual worker, and we may add also intellectually, aesthetically, human being is primarily a worker. We have been alienated because the products of our work has been taken away by the society in the capitalistic society. Therefore, as a productive being, us who expresses herself in the very products that he makes, we are unique, we are special, because we are creative workers for Karl Marx. Karl Rahner, the German theologian who spent most of his life in Innsbruck, Austria, also had a very integrated approach to the whole body-soul aspect of life. His two books and his two ideas are expressed in these phrases. One, human being is a spirit in the world. He is a spirit. There is definitely a spiritual aspect, but the spirit is in the world. He is part of the world and he is embodied. Therefore, as a spirit who is embodied, human being is unique. Secondly, he has got this rich notion, human beings are hearers of the word. You listen to, you hear. Your hearing is something of a physical quantity, so a physical experience. But you are listening to the word of God. Therefore, here too, the word of God is a spiritual dimension. Hearing, enabling us to pay attention to others, is the physical aspect. Therefore, Rahner would rightly say, we are hearers of the word and spirit in the world. And both these things are really integrating, and therefore these thinkers have got an approach to the human person where the body and soul complement each other, enrich each other. Body, soul together form what we are. To come to the French paleontologist and Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he also has got a very integrated approach to human being. He would say that the matter is in fact the solidified spirit. So there is the spirit, which is like the vapor, and then there is the matter, which is like the ice of water. The spirit is the solidified, the body is the solidified spirit. Therefore, there is essentially no difference or distinction nor opposition between matter and soul. All of us together, the material principle and the spiritual principle, all are going to that omega point, that absolute wish fulfillment, that is Jesus Christ. The process of humanization has taken the evolution to attain this human state. That human state is evolution that has become conscious of itself, and we are marching towards the omega point collectively. What is logotherapy? Logotherapy, as the word implies, comes from logos, the word or meaning, and therapy is any healing process. So logotherapy is the healing of a psychological problem by the discovery of meaning. Why do I suffer? If I can find a meaning for that suffering, the suffering becomes bearable and we can heal it. This was proposed by psychotherapist Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, being a Jew, suffered personally during the Second World War under the Nazi concentration camp. When he analyzed what made some people live longer in the extremely bad conditions of the concentration camp, he found out that those who had a meaning to live for could cope with the suffering. That meaning could be a wife who is waiting for him. That meaning could be a hobby or a committed action for which he was ready to sacrifice and bear the pain. Therefore, essentially, logotherapy is that therapy that tries to heal us by providing us with a meaning for life. So, meaning which heals us, that is logotherapy. According to Frankl, how can we make suffering bearable? We may not agree fully with Buddha to say that sarvam dukkham, that everything is suffering. Still we know there is a lot of suffering, most of them unnecessary, in ourselves and in the world. And the proposal, the solution which Frankl gives is that we can somehow not eliminate suffering from our life, but we can at least make it bearable to us by finding a meaning for our life. Many of our old grandmas, their life may be lonely, miserable. They may not even know what to do with themselves with their agonizing pain. But that they have their children to look forward to, their grandchildren, they give some kind of a meaning to themselves and to their suffering, making life bearable. So, Jesus found somehow the meaning of his crucifixion as obedience to God, as doing and fulfilling the will of God. So too, if we can provide a meaning for why we are suffering, then that suffering would become bearable according to Frankl. He who has found a why can cope with any how. This famous quote from Nietzsche has been repeated by Viktor Frankl in his book man's search for meaning. Nietzsche here is saying the same thing that we just referred to. One who has been able to find meaning can cope with any amount of suffering. Nietzsche also has said that which cannot kill you can make you strong. If we are able somehow to withstand the pain and the agony of our life, that would make us stronger. Therefore, suffering, yes, the way we respond to that suffering, the way we take that suffering to ourselves, that is what makes us unique. Some people may collapse, they may become bitter, they may become totally disgruntled. On the other hand, there are also people who have suffered immensely, who have learned the lessons from that sufferings and become wiser and graceful. Therefore, he who has found a why for the sufferings can really cope with the how of it, the means for bearing that suffering. What are the main insights for man's search for meaning? This book, written by Viktor Frankl, the famous psychotherapist, based on his own experience in the concentration camp, emphatically affirms that if we can give a meaning to our life, then our life can become more bearable. Then so many of the neuroses, so many of our psychological difficulties can be solved. The why. The why could be the God we believe in. The why could be the husband or wife we are committed to, the children that we live for, a precious book that we have got to write. So, this why, the commitment to a cause, to a purpose, to a person, that is what makes life really meaningful and bearable. In this context, Pierre Teilhard would say, if we have found a purpose larger than ourselves, then that would make our life beautiful and bearable. The unfortunate thing in today's world is we don't have that kind of an overarching, wider purpose for our life. If we limit the purpose of our life to my own self, to my own individual fulfillment, then our life would become gradually too narrow-minded and thus meaningless. To live is to suffer, and to survive is to find meaning in suffering. This quote, attributed sometimes to Nietzsche, sometimes to Viktor Frankl, would hold, to live is to suffer. There is intense and immense amount of suffering in our world, and the purpose of our suffering is to find meaning. And if we can find meaning in these sufferings, then the suffering can truly make us genuine, graceful. We know so many people who have suffered immensely, tragically, and still they have been able to keep up their mental health, keep themselves sane, and keep themselves graceful. That gracefulness and joy that comes out of the bitter suffering, that is the greatest freedom that they can exercise. Though there is suffering in the world, we are free to discover meaning for that suffering and thus make our life bearable, joyful, and graceful. Can human beings live without meaning for a long time? I would say temporarily or for a short time you can be in a state of meaninglessness. You can still be searching and you may not have all the answers or responses. But in the long term, if we don't have anything to hold on to as meaning, then life itself becomes problematic. Sociologists use the term anomie. The situation of anomie is when the order is disturbed and then you are in a state of orderlessness, lawlessness, normlessness. As a transition period, it's okay, but otherwise, in the long run, it would create problem. The trouble with such a people who has not found meaning is a believer can fall at the feet of the one God whom he worships. But such a normless person will be tempted to fall at the feet of everything and everyone. The sad part of it is, if you don't have anything to hold on, then everything can become a substitute for that one thing to hold on. Addictions, be it drugs, sex, money, power, can easily come by. Therefore, the short answer to this question is no. In the long run, we cannot live without something to hold on, without a value system, without a set of meaning for which I am ready to die as well as to live. Next question talks about the experience of emptiness or powerlessness that gradually overtakes us. Deep down, when I look at myself, I think I am great, I am a teacher, I am a professor. These role models, these external masks seems to make sense to me, and I tend to identify myself with this external mask, with the ego or ahankara that I create for myself. But when we look into our own self, if we remove the mask one after another, then the sad thing emerges that deep down, in spite of my goodness, in spite of my vulnerabilities and weakness, I am nothing, I am lonely, I am powerless. As teenagers or as adults, we imagine that we have so much of power to change the structures, power to change the society, power to influence others. But as we grow up, as we are confronted by the much larger and powerful structure, we realize even the claim of power, whether it be through money, through education, all these claims gradually will have to be given up. And then, truly when we sit naked in front of our own authentic self, naked in front of God, then we realize the emptiness that we are, the powerlessness that we are. Deep down, in spite of our ahankara or our false sense of ego, we are powerless. We cannot control anyone outside, nor can we control our own personal selves. So powerless, so restless we are, so vulnerable we are. Can we do something about this vulnerability? And I think the best solution for that is accept our vulnerability, our powerlessness, our loneliness, accept our emptiness in a sense of humility, realistically and painfully. That would somehow make us lead our lives truly and more meaningfully. It's freedom. Normally people would say freedom is doing what I want to do. But that's not really freedom, because what I want to do may hurt others. Therefore they may say freedom is doing what I want to do provided it doesn't hurt others. But that also is not adequate. Even if it doesn't hurt others, who decides what is hurtful of others? Maybe we can have a better approach to understanding freedom. Freedom is a situation where I am in control of my own self. When I do something on my own will, when I can take up the full responsibility for my freedom. For example, Nelson Mandela was in prison for more than 20 years. His freedom to move out of the prison was curtailed. His freedom to look around the world to be what he is was curtailed. But still he could somehow be the owner and author of himself. His freedom to think, to imagine, to hope for. The freedom not to give up, he gave himself up. That made him really the master of oneself. Maybe we should define the freedom as self-mastery. Not giving in to our temptations and frailties. And even if we give in to our temptations, to own them up and to say, yes, I have done it freely and I am responsible for the consequences. Freedom is very limited, but that's the only thing that we have which makes our life unique, dignified. Can we understand freedom as doing what one wants? This is a very narrow understanding of freedom, doing what one wants. That is what most teenagers understand by freedom. As long as I am ready to go out at night, meet anyone I want, and finish off my life with what I want, that is what the teenagers understand by freedom. But we know, as philosophers who reflect on life, freedom cannot be reduced to doing what I want, doing what an individual wants, because my want is very much limited by the conditions, by time, by space. When I am 16 years old, what I really want may be very different from when I am 60 years old. What I want, does it really promote me? Does it further my own creativity and my life? Given this preconditions, we should say freedom as doing what I want is a very limited and narrow understanding, and that does not do justice to the complex person that we are. On the other hand, we would rather say freedom is being true to myself, doing what I want, but then being responsible to it, because I become the master of this very act of freedom. So freedom may be summed up as self-mastery, owning up what I do. How do you relate freedom of choice to intellect and will? Freedom could be freedom of choice. I have so many things or persons to choose from and to be committed to. Now, in choosing and in committing, two aspects come very clearly. That is, the spiritual faculties of intellect and will. Intellect, as we know, is that spiritual faculty which helps us to know, to analyze, to get data, information, knowledge. While will is that faculty, spiritual faculty, that helps us to do things, to execute, to choose, to long for, to be passionate about. Will enables one to really hope for and to make things better for myself and for the other. The intellect gives us information and data. The will chooses, discerns, and finally executes. When it comes to freedom of choice, say whether I should commit myself to this lady or that lady, obviously I need to get some information, and for that intellect is very useful. But after having got the information, the will takes over, and it is the will who makes the final choice between lady number 1 or lady number 2. It is the will that discerns and finally decides. So in freedom of choice, both intellect and will play a major role, but the will is superior to intellect. What is a will? Give its functions. We have the 5 physical senses, the eyes, the ears, all the senses, the taste, that we are all familiar with. Along with the 5 empirical or physical senses and faculties, we also have 2 spiritual faculties. Generally we call it the intellect and the will. The Indian philosophy adds another one, that is called the mind, and for the time being we leave it out. So what is the will? Will is that faculty which does things, which executes things, which chooses, which discerns, and finally which commits oneself to this person or this cause. Will is that faculty as opposed to the intellect which enables us to do things. There is this famous statement, the intellect without the will is lame. The will without the intellect is blind. The intellect helps us to see. The will helps us to walk, to do things. So the will is that which empowers us, that which enables us, that which executes things. That is the spiritual faculty of the will. What is volitional dynamism? Volitional dynamism. Intellectual dynamism is what was offered by the Belgian Jesuit Joseph Maréchal. That is, beginning with the intellect. We started off with direct judgment, analyzed the direct judgment into its essence and existence. Then we came to the realization that unlimited existence may exist. While the intellect, through its knowledge, is dynamic, we want to know more and more. The unlimited existence alone can fulfill this urge of the will. This gives us an openness to the unlimited existence as far as my intellect or knowledge is concerned. This is called intellectual dynamism. As opposed to that, or complemented by that, we have the volitional dynamism. That is, just like intellect, my will is also open to more and more. My will wants to change the world, wants to make things better and better, wants to love more and more. So the object of my will is the ultimate goodness, the ultimate love. And that ultimate love and that ultimate goodness cannot be satisfied by the ordinary things of this world, because all the ordinary things that we experience are limited. Therefore, the volitional dynamism enables us to see the openness of ourselves, of the will, to an unlimited goodness, the unlimited love, which we call normally God. Just like the intellectual dynamism opens us to the unlimited existence, the volitional dynamism should open us to the unlimited goodness, to the unlimited love, that is God. Confronted with unlimited or absolute goodness, has the will a choice? Normally in the world we experience limited goodness. But suppose in an ideal case, if you find a partner who is perfectly made for each other, then that will has no choice but to commit oneself to this partner. In the same way, when the will meets God, the absolute, unconditional, all-loving God, that is the perfect being for which the will is made of. So confronted with an absolute goodness, an unconditional goodness, the will has no choice but to embrace it. But when we are confronted with the ordinary goodness, which are all limited, the will has a choice. The will has a choice between taking biology or physics. But the will has no choice to take knowledge per se, or love absolute and unconditional. So, confronted with unlimited goodness, the will has no choice. How does the intellect help the will to make a choice? The intellect helps the will by offering different possibilities, different data, information, knowledge, analysis. So, that is the first step in making a choice, the data stage. Based on the data, the will discerns and the will finally chooses. The intellect therefore is very important, but more important than the intellect is the will itself. How do you differentiate between freedom and liberty. Freedom may be spoken of as the different kinds of freedom that we human beings enjoy. And liberty can be seen as the full realization of myself. Liberty could be freedom as self-realization. Freedom as self-realization could be liberty. Freedom from and freedom for. Basically, we can say that freedom from would imply freedom from everything that limits us, inhibits us, enslaves us. Sickness, illiteracy, or external conditions. When we free ourselves from these, that would be freedom from. Freedom for, on the other hand, is the freedom for our own self-realization, for our own self-fulfillment. After having freed ourselves from everything that inhibits us, we are free to grow into maturity, to grow into a harmony which human beings alone can attain. That would be the freedom for. Are we really free? This question is very, very important. Are we really free? Okay, if you ask an ordinary person, he would say, yes, we are free or we are not free. But then we need to realize, are we really free? On the one hand, we need to say, our freedom is very much curtailed. We have so many influences. The society influences us, the world outside influences directly and indirectly. Therefore, our freedom is not absolute. Our freedom is never an absolute thing. But then we shouldn't fall into the other temptation of saying that we are not free at all. If we hold on to this fact that we are not free, then we reduce ourselves to an animal, to a robot. And if we are not free, then we cannot be responsible for our actions. If I am not free, then I can murder someone and I wouldn't be held responsible. Because to be a criminal implies that I have done the act, the crime, with my full knowledge, with my full freedom. The whole legal system, the whole system of governance is based on the fact that we are free. If not, there wouldn't be a court, there wouldn't be a penal system. Also, when we praise or blame others, the implication is that we are really free. The implication is that we are really free. Someone who has succeeded, done well in the class, we praise him because he has achieved something great out of his freedom. Therefore, praising and blaming indirectly implies that we are free. But as I said earlier, ours is a very limited freedom. We have only traces of freedom. But these traces of freedom are very important because this is what makes human beings unique, what makes human beings different from others. These traces of freedom gives us a sense of dignity and self-worth. What is the stand of Freud with regards to freedom? Freud really doesn't believe in freedom. Freud thinks we are all psychologically determined. For Freud, we are powerhouses of sexual energy, libido. And what emerges out of us would be this sexual energy in different forms. Therefore, we may have the illusion we are free, but really we are not free because we are determined by our inner sexual energy, which is very powerful and crucial. Similar to Freud, Skinner believes that we are determined by the society. Society, by its rewards and punishments, that is by its reinforcements, determine our freedom. Society shapes us so radically that there is no way we can get out of the influence of the society. Therefore, Freud as well as Skinner would hold that we are not free, we are determined. What are some of the arguments against determinism for freedom. We believe that so many of these conditions, the place of birth, my parents, the initial upbringing, all these things shape us to a large extent. They condition us, we would hold, but they don't determine us. They condition us means that they shape us so much. Even then, we have some place, we have some way of going beyond this conditioning. If we say they determine us, then there is no way to escape ourselves into that heaven of freedom. So, are we conditioned by freedom or are we determined by freedom? Skinner and Freud would say we are determined. That would mean we are so tightly determined, shaped, molded by external agencies and internal compulsions that we cannot really be free. But then the main argument against this theory of determinism is all of us believe as if we are free. When Freud and Skinner tells us to believe that we are not free, they are at least giving some scope for the change of our mind. And this change of our mind can only be done in freedom. Therefore, even when Skinner and Freud says that we are not free, they invite us to change our mind, and they believe to some extent we are free. They as if behave that we are free. Therefore, even when they say we are not free, the message is sent that the behavior is so that we are to some extent as if free. So this as if argument would hold that although they claim that we are not free, they believe that we can change our views. And changing our views from freedom to determinism implies as if we are free. Therefore, when they say we are not free at all, that we are totally determined, and when they ask us to change our mind, they are inviting us to do it in freedom. How is freedom connected to praise and blame? I praise someone who has done well. I blame someone else who has done badly. Praising and blame implies that he has done this action voluntarily, freely. Suppose I have done something by mistake, accidentally, then I don't need any praise or blame for it. I am praised and blamed because I have done it fully, conscious of what it is. I have done it on my own accord. I have done it freely. Even in our legal system, to be able to praise and blame someone implies that we can work in freedom, deal with each other in freedom. What is the last and greatest freedom according to Frankl? As already indicated, for Viktor Frankl, the last and the greatest freedom is to find meaning in suffering. Our life is full of suffering, yes, but if we can somehow give meaning to that suffering, then that is a unique human ability to give meaning to any of the events, any of our experiences. How does Sartre and Ricoeur differ in their understanding of involuntary freedom? The involuntary dimensions of our life, they are the things that are given to us. The involuntary activities like digestion, breathing and blood circulation, they are involuntary activities. So too are my parents, my initial upbringing, my time, my history. These are all involuntary activities. Ricoeur would say my freedom consists in really saying a no to what is given to me. I should assert my denial. I should say no to what is imposed on me, to what is forced on me. So Sartre would say freedom consists in denying the involuntary aspect of my life. Ricoeur, on the other hand, would say, yes, my involuntary aspects, like my parents, like my blood group, like so many of the unconscious activities of my life, to some extent I can accept them. When I say yes to my limitations, to that which is given to us, then I am exercising my freedom. So Sartre on the one hand would say freedom would mean saying no, and Ricker would say freedom would mean saying yes and accepting my limitations and the involuntary aspects of my life. Thank you very much.